Hello everyone, welcome to Lokmanya. Today we are going to conduct a special episode in memory of Karima Baloch. Karima Baloch was a leading Baloch human rights activist and a pillar of Baloch women. She went missing on 20th December 2020 and later was found dead in Toronto near Lake Ontario. She was the member of BSO Azad and in 2015 she rose up to become the chairperson of BSO Azad. Same year, she went into exile in Canada and was living there until her death. She was elected as the chairperson of the oldest student body organization. And in 2016, she was chosen in BBC 100 Women. Today we have a panel of guests. I would like to introduce them one by one. My first guest, Ms Kiran Nazish. She is a leading South Asian journalist and a war correspondent that has covered Middle East and South Asia. She is also the director of an international organization called Coalition of Women in Journalism, and currently she is a distinguished professor at Brandon University in Canada, and currently she is also living in Canada. My another guest, Mr. Hakeem Baloch, is the president of Baloch National Movement UK Zone. He is currently based in London and is a freelance journalist and columnist by profession. He is also pursuing his higher education in media production. And myself, your host and another guest, I am Mark Kinra, and I'm a corporate lawyer and a geopolitical analyst. I research and write on South Asia geopolitics, specializing mostly on Pakistan and Balochistan. So, welcome everyone. Hello. So, my first question to both of you. So both of you were really good friends with Karima Baloch. Can you share some of her memories with our viewers?
So, basically, as you said, she was a leader of Baloch student organization Azad. Back home, when I started politics in 2007, she was already a leader of that organization, that student organization. Everyone knew Karima Baloch, even though she was wearing that hijab, because she had to wear that hijab to secure herself, not because of she believed all that religiously, like people are forced in that area, but she had to secure herself. But everyone knew where Karima is because of her eyes. And in that time, when we were standing maybe in the fourth or fifth row of the protesters, she was chanting slogans and she was raising slogans and she was leading those protests. And then there was a time, I recently wrote an article about this, about Banu Karima, and then I commemorate that memory as well, when leader of Baloch National Movement and Ghulam Muhammad Baloch were martyred in 2009, along with Sher Muhammad Baloch and Lala Munir. There was a huge public gathering in Mand, which is near to Banu Karima's hometown Tom. So we went there as a participant, but when Banu Karima came along with her other colleagues, there was thousands of people, including myself. Everyone is stand up, they chanted slogan, they show respect to us. That character you saw in her, that was so charismatic when she was in BSO Azad, when she was leading the movement from the front, when she was in the ground. And yes, as we saw her, she was like everywhere. She was in Karachi today, she is in different part of Balochistan, in Quetta tomorrow, she was in Gwadar the other day, sitting with the students, if there was a local issue or that was the issue of Baloch national liberation, she was everywhere. She was leading every Baloch, from a man to woman, from a child to elderly person. When she came in Canada, like in as you said in 2015, she was again leading the cause here. Like in the way she came from there, she did not want it to leave Balochistan, but she had to. Again, she was forced by the situations, and that was a decision of the organization that they wanted to save Karima after what happened to Zayed and the other leadership, Zayed Baloch and other leadership of BSO Azad. So when she came here, she was again leading politics here, but this time in a different manner, in a different way on international platforms. This time everyone saw her face. This time Karima was not wearing that hijab, and she was not hiding her face. Like, you can see Karima Baloch standing in front of public, and she's proudly saying, now I can breathe freely, now I am free. And she was hopeful that living here can give me freedom, living here can be an option to raise my voice more easily than it could be in back home for her. So, and the latest I spoke to her was on 13th of November in 2020 on Baloch Martyrs Day. We had a webinar. I was hosting that webinar, and she was a guest speaker of that. And that was like, I think that was the closest time in the recent time we've been talking to each other, but no one knew that 1 month later we'll be discussing the mysterious murder of Karima Baloch. So yes, that's how it works.
That's really the sad part. Kiran, how about you? What kind of bond did you share with Karima?
Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to say I really appreciate Hakeem, everything that he described. It's I met Karima when I had covered Pakistan, of course, as a journalist, and Balochistan was part of it a long time ago. It's more than a decade ago. And then in 2014, while I was actually covering Iraq at the time, I went back to Pakistan to do a story, and I was there for a couple of weeks. And during that time, the Baloch march was going on in 2014. Mama Khadir led the march, and there were a few people on the front line of that march. Alongside, during that march, also Latif Johar, Karima's friend, was on a hunger strike. And of course, like as a journalist, there are very few journalists in Pakistan, especially international journalists, who are able to cover the Baloch issue because of the censorship on the issue. So this was an important story. So I went to Karachi, and I spent some time speaking to Baloch activists. That's where I met Karima the first time. And before that, I had heard many times by Baloch activists about Karima as well. And I do remember that you're right, that, you could recognize her from her eyes. Everyone would I remember a scene where when I was there, someone wanted her to talk to me, and they were looking for her. So they were just trying to find Karima with her eyes. And so a few things that I want to point out is that as I've known Karima from that time, and then we kept in touch a little bit, just touching up on Baloch issues. I think that, and then meeting here in Toronto, I think a few things that I noticed about her is that she was a mentor to a lot of other activists. She did inspire a lot of other female activists, Baloch activists, but also generally I think her voice, because she had this tenderness to her personality and openness, she brought people in. She took responsibility to make sure that people she was working with felt safe and that she could take care of them. She mentored them. She was like an elder sister to, I know, Latif as well. I remember when Latif was doing the hunger strike, Karima was very, very concerned about making sure that it does not succumb to the hunger strike, and that he's fed on time, etc. Like, she is, she was 37 years old, but I think that she has the wisdom and the sense of responsibility of someone very mature. And I do think that with her, what has happened in Toronto, we still can't say, because it's, in official terms, it was a death. But in this mysterious death, I think that this is a huge loss to the Baloch movement. I think she was a historical figure in the Baloch movement, in the history of Baloch movement, and I think that it's a great loss. As a friend, I became, I'm a journalist. I have covered several wars. I know activists from Syria and Iraq. I've covered the Kurdish issue. So I know activists from a lot of parts of the world. So I can't always develop friendships with people. Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't. And I think that Karima, meeting her in Toronto, we developed a very quick relationship because of her personality. She was very thoroughly read. She was well read. She was well studied. She had a sense of responsibility. She understood what she had to do. As an activist coming to Canada, she took her responsibility very seriously. Every single day, she kept in touch. Her phone was always buzzing with updates of things that were going on in Balochistan. I think that's one of the reasons why she was a huge threat. Not one of the. It's the reason why she was a huge threat to Pakistani establishment, because she's somebody outside of the country, a vocal, strong voice outside of the country. And she is constantly in touch with every part of Balochistan where things are going on. People are getting disappeared every day. There are attacks happening every day, and she was responsibly, communicating with everyone. Never really thinking that, oh, today I'm tired, or yesterday this happened, I can't take the toll. There was no such thing with Karima Baloch. And doing all of that work, alongside her sense of responsibility, she would be able to have a very tender life. She laughed, she joked a lot. We made some videos as friends. We used to cook. Sometimes we cooked and all that. So we have some memories where she's constantly laughing, and she understands the meaning of life. Which comes with all of it, with friendship and love and responsibility.
So many Baloch journalists have been gone missing and have been found dead or are facing threats from the Pakistani establishment. So do you think there is a pattern here? So Kiran, do you would like to go onto this first, as you are a journalist yourself?
Well, I think Hakeem also has done some work in journalism, and he's familiar with that too. So yes, I would say, in Pakistan, I've also covered Fatah and Balochistan, and I was covering the war on terror, the drone war, etc. So anything that had to do with terrorism. And I have also covered Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, I learned more about the threats Pakistani journalists faced because of the ISI, because there's a lot more visibility in Afghanistan. People are more vocal, etc. If you're covering terrorism, especially. So absolutely, I don't think there is any doubt about the fact that Pakistan has become. When I started working as a conflict reporter in Pakistan, there was already so much censorship, and I thought it was impossible to cover certain stories, and it was, Balochistan being one of them. The two major stories were Balochistan and Fatah, Balochistan region. And on the one hand, in Balochistan, you had abductions going on. We know about the death squad. I think that phenomena is now very well known. But when I was there, it wasn't more than a decade ago. People did not know death squad. Only Baloch activists would talk about it, and Pakistani media was forced to ignore that because of the threats and censorship. Also, there was this lack of understanding by Pakistani media, by the local media. They did not understand what Baloch were going through, or they did not believe what Baloch were going through, because and I've worked in those media organizations where this used to happen, because there was this idea of separatism, or the separatist movement, or the Baloch people. The violations that were taking place against the Baloch people were considered okay by some of the local media, because they were connected to the separatist movement. So I think that when there is a lot of censorship, it becomes much easier for oppressive regimes to carry out violations against activists and journalists. And yes, I don't think that there has been any Baloch journalist who has covered Balochistan thoroughly or knows about Balochistan thoroughly who has not been targeted. I was also targeted in Pakistan. Of course, it comes with the job. I think when you go and cover difficult stories, journalists know that we will be threatened. So it's not something that, it's not a big deal. It's part of the job that was to cover certain stories like Balochistan. And yes, I think I know numerous journalists who have been targeted for covering the issues in Balochistan. I know journalists who have been killed, which also affected my own reporting. I mean, I stopped reporting on Balochistan after some of the difficulties I had seen and faced as well. So I think that it's difficult. And then also, I do want to point out that when I was there in the earlier, say, I think 2008, 2009, when I was trying to look into some of the work, I was a female reporter working for freelancing for foreign press. I also used to write for Indian publications called Tehelka at the time, when Tehelka was there. So Tehelka was accommodating in covering, doing some investigative pieces as well. And I think that during that time, there weren't a lot of women who were from the outside going inside. So I had some access in Pakistan because I was a woman, and it helped me, go there safely. But then eventually, what I'm trying to say is, like, after a few years, even that was limited because things have become so dangerous now that I know another journalist, Mahwish Ahmed, Hakeem probably knows her as well. And when she went there, she tried reporting and she faced a lot of difficulties. People whom she was staying with faced a lot of difficulties. So now I don't think it's almost impossible to go and report on issues without being seen and being caught and being harassed.
Right. Hakeem, how about you?
I think Kiran has broadly talked about how the journalists have faced many difficulties and people lost their life for reporting Balochistan. I think one of the international journalists was Carlota Gaul. She was attacked and she was forced to leave Balochistan and then Pakistan because she was covering Balochistan. Other than that, yes, we recently saw a case of Sajid Hussain. We, the Baloch nation, feel that something happened there which was not normal, which was not a case of an accident, because Sajid was a famous journalist. He was covering Balochistan when he was in Balochistan, and even after an exile before coming to Sweden, all that time he was constantly writing about Balochistan. The kind of journalism Balochistan gets from Pakistan is like, I remember in one of the TV talk shows where BSO Azad's ex-chairman, Missing Zaid Baloch, was there, and he was talking with the journalist. If I'm not wrong, that lady was, I think, Naseem Zahra. I may be wrong, and she forced them to speak in that narrative which Pakistani army or the establishment wants. If you're getting that kind of journalism within the state, so you cannot get a free media there. The people of that area are not allowed to cover the stories of Balochistan. There are many media outlets that they have newspapers. They went out of the game. They were shut. Daily Tawar. There was a media called Asab. There were many Urdu newspaper which came from Balochistan. They tried to bring the real news, as earlier Kiran mentioned, like there are abductions happening. There is a death squad which is working under the influence of army and the establishment, and no one knew about them. Think of it, all of a sudden you get 3 or 4 mass graves from which people unearthing around 200 or 300 dead bodies, and the people responsible for that, Shafiq Mengal, is still part of the establishment. So you see, the information is not coming out to the world. And that is only because the media, the free media, the international media, people who actually want to bring the stories, even the local journalists, people like Kiran herself and Mahwish, there were some people, they tried to get in there, but unfortunately you're not allowed. You're not allowed by the mighty powers, those who don't want to be seen as the devil, which they are actually. So yes, it is really bad. And in current situation, I think if someone is reporting Balochistan, they really don't want no one to know who they are. So that's how bad it is.
I want to point something out, something very important that Hakeem said. The thing is that we need to understand censorship. You guys are in India, and these days, my organization, we also document violations against women journalists. And by the way, India is one of the top countries on our list where women, if they're covering protests right now, you guys are having farmer protests, etc.
Right.
Don't want to confuse the topic, but what I'm trying to say is that censorship works like this. That states would silence journalists independently, first of all. Then they would silence the media at large. Then in Pakistan, that kept building up. And then there came a time, I think around 2012 to 2014 was a time where media organizations were getting letters from the establishment with instructions that these are the kind of things you cannot touch. You cannot report on this. So there were red zones that were sent officially. First there was threat to journalists, but then when you have an official policy for the media to follow and not cover certain stories, the blackout of media, the blackout of stories of that regions is taking shape. So that Hamid Mir, he's an influential journalist, and he covers very specific stories, right? Important national stories. Right. So when Hamid Mir, of course, Hamid Mir and journalists across the country know what's going on in Balochistan. They just can't cover it because of the dangers. But then, and there came a time, and Hamid told this to me from his hospital bed when he was attacked in 2014, because he gave a platform to Baloch issues, and he let Mama Kadir speak after his long march. I mean, it was the longest march in history of activism. A group of Pakistanis, Baloch activists across the country, on foot. So it was a historic. I'm sorry, I just need to give some details to you. These are historic things that are happening. And then a leading journalist gives a platform, he's attacked. So what happens to other journalists when this kind of thing happens is they don't want to get into it. And they don't want to cover it. So Naseem, for example, example of Naseem's interview with Baloch activists, or any journalists who are able to interview Baloch activists, or touch upon the Baloch issue, they have to censor themselves and they have to ask questions as if it was the establishment asking them, so that they don't get attacked, but they still want to engage. Like if they want to engage, they're taking a risk anyway. And then they have to ask these questions, which really hurts Baloch people, because Baloch people are suffering. So it's like a really complicated situation where anyone, if in the media they want to really do it, it's really a tricky situation where you can't really get into the bottom of the issue without really hurting Baloch people as well in the process. So I'm sorry, Hakeem. I mean, about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if Hamid Mir can be attacked, the lesser known journalists who are not that famous are obviously an easy target. So yeah, that's always the case. And by the way, just commenting about Mama Kadir's walk. He actually broke record of Mahatma Gandhi. Earlier he had earlier he had the record of the longest march, Dandi March, but Mama Kadir broke it. Yeah. In 2016, Karima made a video message to PM Modi, and he stated that she considers her PM Modi as his brother, and said that we can fight our own war. You just be our voice. What are your thoughts about this? So Hakeem, would like to go on this first?
Thank you very much. One thing, I think, as the Baloch activists, as the Baloch nation, we always say that the Baloch has historical relations with the nations in this region, be it Afghanistan, India, because historically Pakistan was not a nation before 1947, if we just not follow the social studies of Pak studies. So Baloch always considered that as a relation with India, and I think that was in that context, because that was a clear message from all Baloch leaders, like one thing we would never be like, because when they say the Baloch are taking support from other countries, the Pakistan establishment and the military, we never deny that. We say if we receive any help of any form, like if you are part of a political struggle, if someone is supporting your struggle on an international platform, if you say no, that will lead you into isolation, and we don't want to be isolated, because as we mentioned earlier, there a lot of things happening in Balochistan that is not coming out, that because of the Baloch has not received that much of a voice on international platforms or a help from any international organization or a country. So yes, I think the main point of that video message was like, be the voice for the Baloch on diplomatic fronts, on international platforms. And that was not only for a message for Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. She was in Canada because of that very reason. She was telling the Canadian people, she was meeting Canadian diplomats, she was meeting Canadian politicians and telling them about what's happening in Balochistan. And that is what I guess all the Baloch diaspora is doing. We are telling the world that what is happening to us, and when it's come to India, we are more hopeful because it is our neighbor, and being the biggest democracy in the world, there are some responsibility India has, so they should play that, and that was in that context.
Got that. Kiran, what's your take on this?
Well, I would say that, of course, everything that Hakeem had said, I think it's very important to acknowledge that. Very important. I think that there is a lot of misinterpretation. Immediately, there are misinterpretations when it comes to India, and which is what I wanted to touch upon, is that because Pakistan and India are constantly, are not best friends, are not great neighbors to each other, to say the least. There are quick conspiracies that are developed with anything that has to do with the Baloch struggle, or anyone really in Pakistan, when they want to speak to India. And I think that this is one of the downsides as well, because the Baloch people are saying, look, or what Karima wanted to say through that message, as Hakeem pointed out, this is part of the many messages to a lot of other countries who believe in democracy, or who want to, who are democracies and who have responsibilities, right, for democratic values in the world. So, India is one of the neighbors. This happens with the Pashtun people too, like when they speak to any, like Afghanistan, where half of the Pashtun population, more than half is in Afghanistan. So like when they refer to that, there are quick conspiracies about that as well. So I want to point out that I think Karima's message was, there was more coverage about how she was speaking to Modi and how she was funded by India and she's a raw agent. Then there was about to pay attention on the message that she had, which was, there are violations going on in Balochistan and we are in desperate need of that attention. I think that's her message. I also want to point out, it is, I know for the longest of time, with many Baloch activists, I know some professors, I know people like Mr. Talpur, Mir Muhammad Talpur, who's a wonderful person. I know Mama Kadir. I've spoken to many Baloch activists who would always hesitate before speaking of India or to India, because for the longest time Baloch people have struggled between this thing, that they're called the activists and the liberators who are getting money from India and working for India and being funded by India and so on and so forth. So, and I think this is a great strategic tool that Pakistani establishment has used against Baloch people, which sort of undermines their message, and quickly Baloch people become enemies of the state. For Pakistanis, and oftentimes Pakistani media too, right? There's this constant conversation in Pakistani media that don't give coverage to them because they're funded by the Indians, right? So coming back to, laying that background, coming back to Karima's message, I think that I spoke to her about this message because I know that a lot of times I know that Baloch activists would not try to not do anything with India because they don't want to be They don't want to be called out as people getting money from India. So they don't want anything to do with India sometimes, right? And I think I had this conversation with Karima only this October. I was like, you did that message, and what were you thinking? And she said, I think that over a long period of time where she's trying to do her work and trying to get the message across, it doesn't get across. The abductions are still going on. People are still disappeared. Violations are still going on. It was kind of an attempt to push the buttons a little bit and to get the attention that Baloch people need. And I think that Karima did see, sorry, I'm still working on my tenses here. She did see Modi as a leader of one of the largest democracies, who is a neighbor. She did, from her point of view, Modi represents democracy in India, and she wanted to reach out to, a leader who understood democracy and who would perhaps would be able to do something on behalf of the Baloch people since Pakistanis are not doing it already.
Karima Baloch was a female journalist and one of the few female leaders in largely patriarchal society. How can her work and life be leveraged to inspire Baloch journalists and especially Baloch women and girls to carry on the cause? Hakeem, first, could you reflect on this?
I think you can see Karima in Balochistan now. This is what I can only say that Karima is already on the streets of Balochistan. Karima is chanting slogan for Karima herself. You see thousands of Karima all on the streets of Balochistan. That is what I can only say, and this will continue till the last Baloch woman exist on this world, because otherwise I have no words to express or to say how people will. You can't forget Karima. That's how she was. That how much she did for the Baloch region. That's all I can say.
Right.
I'll just briefly say that to the point that you were talking about. Again, going back to a lot of things that I think Hakeem started with, like why she used to take the hijab and all that. So to address that, I do want to say that oftentimes I used to many years ago, I used to hear sometimes Baloch activists also try to balance misogyny in society. They faced a lot of trouble while they were out, in the long march and doing activism on the front lines, because there was, on the other side, there's this misogynistic society, and on one hand, these women are out there and they're speaking and they're coming out. So, and I think that Karima was leading much of that. She brought in many other women, and her presence and her mentorship made sure that these women were alongside her. Right? So I think she played a huge role in surpassing that threshold, where should a woman stop in activism? She overcame that threshold. She brought in a new vision for women to participate. She did it very visibly when she moved to Canada. She took off her niqab to represent her face and to say, this is who I am. I'm a Baloch woman. I can speak. I have a voice. I have issues to talk about. She demanded people to listen to her. And I think Baloch people and Baloch society also understood that and embraced that message. And they understood the logic behind that message. Because, for Baloch people, it's much more than just misogyny and the gender discrimination and gender divide. I think Baloch people are asking for basic human rights. They're asking for equality, and they're asking for the right to live with dignity and visibility. So they immediately understood Karima's message, which was of a young girl, very logical, educated message. She's a girl. Please remember that she's a girl who comes from a village where there is no running water. Right. She's a girl who has grown from different systems because of her logic and her intelligence. And I think that Baloch people share that intelligence, and they understand that, and they relate to her.
Right. Guys, thank you very much. I just hope that her life and her work inspires all the people across the world and also in Balochistan especially. I think that is really required at the moment. I think it is for the time which is the most important thing. Again, thank you very much for your time.